In January 2025, Donald Trump returned to the White House with a promise that millions of American voters had heard many times before. America will no longer be trapped in endless wars. After more than 2 decades buried in the smoke of Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, the American people had grown exhausted from wars that consumed trillions of dollars without bringing real benefits or true peace. Of course, Trump understood that, and he appeared at exactly the right moment, with a promise to bring America back within its own borders. Less intervention, less war, less playing the role of the global police. For these very reasons, many people believed he would restore order to the world. But then, just a few months after returning to the White House, the world began to notice something strange. American bombers kept appearing in the skies over the Middle East. US warships moved closer to Yemen. Secret military operations in Africa continued. Washington constantly mentioned new threats. And most notably, the list of countries falling into America's sights kept growing, including Cuba, Mexico, Colombia, Nicaragua, Iran. Even Greenland, a territory belonging to NATO ally Denmark, was being mentioned. After the recent instability surrounding Venezuela, Iran, and Greenland, the question now is, does America truly want to end wars? Or have the forever wars never actually ended and are simply changing locations? And where exactly are these locations? A question that perhaps leaves many people wondering. First of all, if there is one place that has haunted America for more than half a century, it is probably Cuba, a small island located only 150 kilometers from Florida. Yet, this very place once pushed the entire world to the edge of nuclear war. In 1959, Fidel Castro led the revolution that overthrew the Cuban government, which at the time was friendly toward the United States and heavily influenced by Washington in Havana, turning Cuba into a communist outpost right on Washington's doorstep. Americans never truly accepted that. From the failed Bay of Pigs invasion to the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, Cuba became a geopolitical scar that never fully healed in America's mind. And now, after surviving for decades thanks to cheap oil from Venezuela, Cuba is entering its most dangerous period since the Cold War. For many years, the relationship between Havana and Caracas resembled a survival exchange. Venezuela supplied oil, Cuba sent doctors, teachers, security advisors, and intelligence personnel to protect the socialist government in Caracas. But when Nicolas Maduro collapsed, everything began to shake. Cuba's most important lifeline stood on the verge of disappearing. Mass blackouts struck Cuba. People stood in line for hours just to buy fuel. Young Cubans searched for ways to leave the country by any means possible. Tourism collapsed after the pandemic, making the already exhausted economy suffocate even further. If Venezuela had once been an oxygen tank, then now someone seemed ready to pull out Cuba's final breathing tube. And right at that moment, Donald Trump began mentioning Cuba with highly suggestive words. Something will have to end there. It sounded vague, but in America, everyone understands Washington rarely says things like that randomly. And what is happening in Cuba may only be the beginning. For more than 40 years, cocaine has become a ghost haunting America. From the era of Pablo Escobar to modern cartels, Washington has poured hundreds of billions of dollars into the war on drugs. But there is a painful paradox. Drugs never disappeared. On the contrary, the cartels became richer. Violence became even more horrifying. And now, an even more dangerous substance has emerged: fentanyl. Every year, tens of thousands of Americans die from fentanyl. In many US states, the opioid crisis has turned into a national catastrophe. In the eyes of many MAGA voters, the southern border is no longer simply an immigration issue. It is a battlefield. And that is why Trump constantly talks about Mexico. He has repeatedly hinted at the possibility of sending the US military across the border to hunt down drug cartels. Drones, special forces, cross-border airstrikes. Ideas once considered extreme are now beginning to appear openly in American political debates. But what makes the situation even more dangerous is that Mexico is not Afghanistan. It is America's direct neighbor, Washington's largest trading partner, and also a sovereign nation with an extremely strong sense of national pride. President Claudia Sheinbaum has tried to ease tensions, but every time Trump says that America will have to do something, markets begin to shake. Because everyone understands. All it takes is one small mistake along the more than 3,000-kilometer border between the US and Mexico, and everything could spiral out of control. And Mexico has, perhaps, never been a place that made Trump feel comfortable. Next on the list is probably Colombia. Right now in Colombia, the confrontation has taken on a clearer ideological character than ever before. On one side is Gustavo Petro, the first left-wing president in modern Colombian history, a former guerrilla fighter, a politician who has consistently criticized American influence in Latin America. On the other side is Donald Trump, the symbol of American nationalism, a man who believes Washington must tightly control its own backyard. Trump accuses Colombia of failing to control cocaine production, and when asked whether America could carry out military operations targeting Colombia, Trump simply smiled and said, "That sounds like a good idea." That statement immediately enraged Bogotá. Colombia's foreign ministry warned that they would respond with strong military action if their sovereignty were violated. It may sound unbelievable, but the prospect of two nations that were once the region's closest allies entering into military confrontation, something once thought impossible, no longer seems so distant. And behind it all lies a doctrine that has existed for more than 200 years, the Monroe Doctrine. In 1823, President James Monroe made a declaration that changed the entire Western Hemisphere. The message was simple: the Americas are America's backyard, and any force opposing Washington's interests could become a target. 2 centuries have passed, but that mindset seems to have never disappeared. From Cuba, Chile, Panama, Nicaragua, to Venezuela, the traces of American intervention appear throughout Latin America. And now, Nicaragua continues to remain in Washington's sights. Daniel Ortega, the leader who once overthrew the dictatorship supported by America long ago, is moving increasingly closer to Russia and China. That makes Washington especially uncomfortable, because for America, the most frightening thing has never been a small nation in Central America, but rather the possibility that its geopolitical rivals could gain a foothold in its backyard. And perhaps the most remarkable thing in all of this is that the issue may not lie with Donald Trump alone. Because for decades, regardless of whether the president was Republican or Democrat, America has continuously intervened around the world. From Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, presidents changed, slogans changed, policies changed, but the power structure of the world's #1 superpower seems to have never truly stopped. There is a strange paradox. The most powerful nation on Earth is also the nation that constantly feels threatened everywhere. And when a superpower like America believes it must intervene in every crisis, then the line between war and world peace may become increasingly blurred. And is the world moving closer to peace, or merely entering a new version of old wars?